A chilling betrayal. A moment of pure shock. A gunshot that changes everything. What would you do if you walked in on the ultimate betrayal? If the people you trusted most harbored secrets so devastating that they shattered your world in an instant? If a single moment forced you to make a decision that could never be undone? Tonight, we unravel a case that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and trust. Welcome to a story of deception, heartbreak, and the irreversible consequences of a moment's rage. But before we dive into the shocking details, make sure you subscribe for more gripping real-life crime stories. Turn on notifications because this is one story you won't want to miss. Love and trust are fragile. They take years to build, but only a single moment to destroy. Julia Mercer believed she had it all: a devoted husband, a beautiful home, and a life many would envy. Her marriage to Ethan was the kind that others admired. From the outside, they were the perfect couple, the kind that hosted elegant dinner parties, shared loving glances across the room, and celebrated anniversaries with grand gestures. Julia prided herself on the life she had built. She had worked hard to create something stable, something real. But what she didn't know was that a storm had been brewing just beneath the surface. Her sister, Sophia Dawson, had always been a part of her life. They had grown up together, shared secrets as children, and confided in each other through every heartbreak and success. Sophia was charming, confident, and undeniably beautiful, a woman who turned heads wherever she went. She was the life of every gathering, the one who knew how to light up a room. And she was someone Julia trusted without question. But trust can be a dangerous thing. There were no obvious warning signs. No sudden changes in Ethan's behavior that would have made Julia suspicious. If anything, he was as charming and attentive as ever. The late nights at work, the occasional unanswered texts, these were easy to dismiss. After all, he was a businessman, a man constantly dealing with clients and deadlines. Julia had no reason to believe anything was wrong. Until the night everything changed. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. Julia had been away on a business trip, a short trip that was meant to last the weekend. But an unexpected cancellation of meetings allowed her to return home earlier than planned. Excited to surprise her husband, she didn't bother to call ahead. She wanted to see the look of surprise on his face when she walked through the door. But the look she saw on his face that night wasn't surprise. It was panic. The house was quieter than usual. The soft hum of music played in the background, and a faint glow of candlelight flickered from the bedroom. At first, Julia smiled to herself, assuming Ethan had planned something romantic for when she returned. But as she stepped inside, as she walked down the hallway and reached the door that had been left slightly ajar, her entire world came crashing down. There, in the dim light of the bedroom, stood Ethan. And in his arms was Sophia. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of betrayal. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of the scene before her. Her husband, her partner, her best friend, stood intimately close to her sister. The sheets were disheveled, their bodies too close, too familiar. Shock turned to anger. Anger turned to heartbreak. The betrayal burned through her veins like fire, and her voice trembled as she spoke, demanding an explanation, screaming for the truth. But no excuse could undo what she had just seen. Sophia stepped back, guilt flashing across her face, but there was something else in her eyes, something Julia couldn't quite place. Ethan stammered, scrambling for words, for anything that could make this nightmare disappear. He reached for Julia, but she recoiled, disgusted by his touch. The argument escalated. Voices rose. Accusations were thrown like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. The tension in the room became unbearable, a suffocating force pressing down on all three of them. And then, everything spiraled out of control. In the chaos, in the flurry of emotion and betrayal, a gun appeared. Who reached for it first? Was it Julia, blinded by rage and heartbreak? Was it Ethan, desperate to regain control of the situation? Or was it Sophia, trying to protect herself from what she knew was coming? The answer didn't matter. Because in that moment, as hands struggled, as tempers flared, as fear overtook rationality, one thing happened that no one could take back. A shot rang out. A single deafening explosion that echoed through the house, sending a shockwave of silence through the room. And then, someone collapsed. The reality of what had just happened sank in like a slow-moving nightmare. The scent of gunpowder lingered in the air. A body lay motionless on the floor. Blood pooled onto the once pristine bedroom carpet. A moment of passion, of rage, had led to the unthinkable. Everything changed in that instant. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, had already called the police. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the Mercer home as officers arrived, pushing through the door with urgency. Inside they found Julia still clutching the gun, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Her face was pale, her breath ragged. Sophia stood against the wall, her expression unreadable. Was it fear? Was it guilt? And then on the floor Ethan lay bleeding, his chest rising and falling in weak, shallow breaths. Detectives would later piece together the events of that night, trying to determine what had truly happened. Was it an accident? A crime of passion? Or was there something far more sinister at play? Secrets would come to light. Hidden messages, whispered conversations, months of deception, all of it pointing to a tangled web of lies more twisted than anyone could have imagined. But the most important question remained: who pulled the trigger, and why? As the case unfolds, as testimonies are given and evidence is examined, one thing becomes painfully clear: this was never just a simple case of infidelity. This was a deadly game of betrayal, and someone had just lost. Stay with us as we dive deeper into the shocking revelations behind this case. What led to this explosive confrontation? Was it truly self-defense, or was there a plan all along? The truth is far darker than you think. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime breakdowns. What do you think happened that night? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And remember, sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. Perfection. It's what everyone strives for, what people long to achieve in their careers, their homes, their relationships. And for Julia Mercer, perfection was more than just an ideal. It was her reality. At least that's what she believed. She had everything a woman could ask for: a devoted husband, a beautiful home, a stable life filled with love and comfort. From the outside, the Mercers were the kind of couple that others envied. They attended charity galas together, shared affectionate glances across crowded rooms, and took picturesque vacations that filled their social media feeds with images of undeniable happiness. Friends admired their bond, neighbors spoke of their kindness, and colleagues whispered about how lucky Julia was to have found a man like Ethan Mercer. And why wouldn't they? Ethan was everything a woman could want in a husband: successful, charming, and devoted. He had built a name for himself in the business world, working tirelessly to provide a life of luxury and security. With his sharp suits and confident demeanor, he exuded the image of a man in control, someone who could handle anything life threw his way. And Julia? She was his perfect counterpart. Elegant, intelligent, and endlessly supportive, she stood by his side through every triumph, believing wholeheartedly in the life they had created together. But perfection is often an illusion, a carefully curated facade that hides the cracks beneath. And in the Mercer household, those cracks were beginning to show. At first they were easy to ignore. The late nights at the office, the urgent phone calls Ethan would step away to take, the faintest flicker of hesitation in his eyes when Julia asked if everything was okay. He always had an explanation, always reassured her with a kiss on the forehead and a smile that seemed genuine. Yet, something in her gut told her otherwise. It wasn't just the phone calls or the sudden work trips, it was the change in their conversations, the distance that seemed to grow between them despite the love they professed. Julia told herself it was just stress, that work had been demanding, that they had both been too busy to connect the way they used to. Relationships go through ups and downs, she reminded herself. This was just a rough patch, a temporary moment in an otherwise beautiful marriage. But deep down, a quiet unease began to settle in her chest. There were the hushed arguments late at night, when Ethan's patience seemed thinner than usual. The way his phone was always face down on the table. The briefest flashes of irritation when she asked him if everything was all right. And then there was Sophia. Sophia Dawson had always been a part of Julia's life. Her younger sister, her best friend, her closest confidant. They had grown up side by side, sharing secrets, dreams, and laughter. Despite their differences, Julia, the responsible older sister, Sophia, the carefree spirit, they had always been inseparable. Sophia had a presence that drew people in. With her striking beauty and flirtatious charm, she could turn heads without effort. She was the kind of woman who knew how to command attention, how to make a room gravitate toward her. Julia had always admired her sister's confidence, had even envied it at times. But lately that admiration had been tainted by something else: doubt. Julia had never questioned her sister's loyalty before. She had never second-guessed the way Sophia and Ethan interacted. But then there were the glances, fleeting but lingering just a second too long. The private jokes they shared, the casual touches that seemed innocent but left a strange feeling in the pit of Julia's stomach. One evening, as Julia and Ethan prepared for a dinner party, she caught something. Something small, something subtle but undeniable. Ethan had been adjusting his cufflinks, his head tilted slightly toward the mirror, when his phone vibrated against the dresser. A single message lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you." The name attached to it? Sophia. Julia's heart pounded in her chest. For a moment she told herself she was being paranoid. There could be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Sophia was just confirming her arrival for the party, maybe she was excited to catch up. But the nagging voice in the back of Julia's mind whispered otherwise. Doubt is a dangerous thing. Once it takes root, it spreads like wildfire, consuming every thought, every moment, until it becomes impossible to ignore. The signs were there, the soft laughter that died down the second Julia entered the room, the slight tension when Ethan and Sophia stood too close together. And then there was the perfume, a scent Julia didn't recognize, lingering faintly on Ethan's shirt after one of his supposed late meetings. But the worst part? The part that gnawed at Julia more than anything else? She still wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in the man she had married, in the love they had built, in the life that had always seemed so perfect. She wanted to believe that she was imagining things, that her fears were unfounded, that she was reading too much into meaningless moments. Because if she was right, if the truth was what she feared, then everything she had ever known was a lie. And so she played along. She smiled at dinner parties, held Ethan's hand in public, laughed at Sophia's stories as if nothing was wrong. She convinced herself that she was being foolish, that she was letting her insecurities get the best of her. But the illusion was beginning to crack. The perfect marriage, the devoted husband, the loyal sister. Nothing was as it seemed. And soon, sooner than she could have ever anticipated, Julia would learn the truth. A truth that would shatter her world. A truth that would leave blood on the floor. The night that changed everything. Fate has a cruel way of revealing the truth. It doesn't whisper in your ear, gently preparing you for what's to come. No, it waits until the perfect moment, striking like a viper, sinking its fangs deep when you least expect it. For Julia Mercer, that moment came on a night that should have been like any other. She wasn't supposed to be home. She wasn't supposed to walk through that door. But fate had other plans. Julia had been away on a business trip, one that was meant to last the entire weekend. She had left Ethan with a loving kiss, promising to call when she landed, trusting, always trusting, that her husband would be waiting for her when she returned. The conference had gone well, meetings unfolding seamlessly, but then came the unexpected message. An emergency at the office had led to an abrupt cancellation. She was free to return home a day early. Most wives would be thrilled at the prospect. An extra day to spend in the arms of the man they loved. And Julia was no different. As she boarded her flight, she smiled at the thought of surprising Ethan, of seeing the joy on his face when she walked through the door unexpectedly. She never imagined the surprise would be hers. The car ride home was quiet, the city bathed in a golden glow as the last remnants of daylight faded into night. Julia watched the passing streets, thinking of Ethan, of the warmth of their home, of the simple joy of returning to the familiar. But as the taxi turned onto their street, something strange stirred in her chest. The house was dark. No porch light, no welcoming glow from the windows. Ethan always left a light on for her. Even when he worked late, even when he was in another room, there was always some small beacon of warmth waiting for her. But tonight there was nothing. A chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off. Maybe he had fallen asleep. Maybe he had gone out for a quick errand, not expecting her back until the next night. She stepped out of the car, suitcase rolling lightly against the pavement as she made her way to the front door. She fumbled for her keys, slipping them into the lock, her heart fluttering with excitement at the thought of seeing Ethan's surprised face. She pushed the door open. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of an empty house, but something else, something thick, heavy, suffocating. The air was different, charged with an unspoken tension. Then she heard it. A whisper. Soft, hushed voices coming from upstairs. Her stomach twisted. Ethan never talked in hushed tones. If he were on the phone, his voice would carry, filling the house. But this was different. This was the kind of whisper that came from secrecy, from careful, deliberate discretion. The kind of whisper that didn't belong in her home. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped out of her heels, leaving them by the door. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she moved down the hallway, her breathing shallow. The wooden floor creaked beneath her weight, and for a moment she froze, listening. The voices had stopped. Julia's fingers trembled as she reached for the staircase railing. Step by step, she climbed, every nerve in her body screaming at her to turn around, to leave, to pretend she had never come back. But some truths refused to be ignored. She reached the top of the stairs, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, the soft glow of a bedside lamp spilling through the crack. And then she saw them. Ethan, Sophia, tangled together in a way that left no room for doubt. For a moment the world stopped. Time ceased to exist. Her mind struggled to comprehend the image before her, fought against the reality that her own eyes were presenting. She must have been mistaken. This couldn't be real. But it was. Ethan turned first, his expression morphing from pleasure to sheer horror. Sophia's gasp filled the air, her body jerking away as if she had been burned. Julia. The sound of her name shattered the spell. The numbness gave way to a tidal wave of emotion, crashing into her with relentless force. Betrayal. Rage. Heartbreak. A scream tore from her throat before she even realized she was screaming. How could you? The words erupted from her like venom, raw and unfiltered. Ethan scrambled to his feet, hands raised as if he could somehow erase what she had just seen. Julia, listen to me. Don't you dare, she spat, her chest heaving. Don't you dare try to explain this. Sophia had wrapped the sheets around her, her face pale, eyes wide with guilt. Julia, please, Shut up. The room was a storm of chaos. Shouts. Accusations. Julia's voice cracked with fury, her vision blurred with tears. How long? She demanded. Ethan hesitated. How long? She screamed. His lips parted, but the answer didn't come. Because what could he say? What excuse could possibly make this right? Then, movement. A drawer yanked open. A glint of metal. Julia's breath hitched. Ethan had a gun. Her mind struggled to keep up with what was happening. A second ago they were screaming at each other. And now there was a gun in his hand. Put it down, she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. His grip tightened. His eyes were wild, darting between her and Sophia. This isn't what it looks like, he said, his voice shaking. Julia let out a bitter laugh, hysteria creeping in. Not what it looks like. Are you insane? Ethan's hands trembled. I didn't want you to find out like this. A gun. In her bedroom. Held by the man she thought she knew. Sophia whimpered, clutching the sheet against her chest. Ethan, please. For a split second, Julia wondered if the gun was meant for her. If this was how it ended, if this was how her perfect marriage crumbled. But then, bang. A single gunshot shattered the night. Julia screamed. Sophia gasped. And as the smoke curled through the air, as the ringing in her ears dulled into silence, the truth settled over them like a suffocating weight. The night had changed everything. And nothing would ever be the same again. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. A heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that only exists in the split second before disaster strikes. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, curling through the tension like a whisper of death. Julia stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The ringing in her ears was deafening, drowning out everything else. Then chaos. Sophia screamed, the raw sound piercing through the room. Ethan staggered back, his grip still tight around the gun, his face pale with horror. The gun had fired. But who had been shot? Julia's body trembled as she frantically scanned the room, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Time seemed to slow, every movement stretched into eternity. Sophia clutched her shoulder, her fingers pressing into her skin as she let out a sharp cry. Blood seeped between her fingers, dark and glistening. She had been shot. Ethan let out a strangled gasp. Oh my God! His hands shook, the gun slipping from his grasp and clattering onto the floor. The sound of metal against hardwood was deafening in the stunned silence that followed. Julia's breath came in short, ragged gasps. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her sister. Her own sister shot. But who pulled the trigger? Ethan stood frozen, his eyes darting between Julia and Sophia as if his own mind couldn't keep up with what had just transpired. Sophia whimpered, sinking to her knees, her breaths coming in panicked, shallow bursts. Her voice broke, pain overtaking her words. It was an accident. Julia barely heard her. The weight of betrayal, the intensity of the moment, was crushing her, suffocating her. Her vision blurred, but not from tears. Her body was trembling with something deeper. Fury. Rage. Madness. Everything was unraveling, faster than she could control it. She lunged at Sophia. A scream tore through the room as Julia's hands wrapped around her sister's arms. How could you? She shrieked. How could you do this to me? Sophia whimpered, trying to pull away, her injured shoulder making her weak. Julia, please? Ethan shoved himself between them. Stop it. His voice was hoarse, cracking under the pressure. "She's hurt." Julia's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "She should be dead," she hissed. Sophia's face paled. "You don't mean that." But Julia did. The betrayal had burned away all reason, all compassion. All that was left was the raw, festering wound of what they had done to her. Ethan ran a shaking hand through his hair. "We need to get help. We need to." His words were cut off by the distant sound of sirens. Someone had heard the shot. Julia blinked, snapping back to reality. Panic flickered in Ethan's eyes as the realization hit him. "The police," he breathed. Sophia's hands trembled. "Ethan, we have to tell them it was an accident." "But was it?" Julia looked at the gun on the floor, its cold metal glinting in the dim light. The weight of the truth pressed against her chest. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a crime scene. And the worst was yet to come. The flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows against the Mercer home. A crowd of curious neighbors had already gathered, murmuring among themselves as uniformed officers moved swiftly through the scene. The night air was thick with tension, the acrid scent of gunpowder still lingering inside the house. Detective Marcus Langley stepped out of his car, adjusting the cuffs of his coat. His sharp, weary eyes scanned the house before he took a slow breath. Another domestic dispute turned violent. He had seen it before, but something about this one felt off. Inside, chaos reigned. Julia Mercer sat on the floor, her hands trembling, her wide eyes fixed on the gun that now lay discarded on the hardwood. She had barely moved since the shot was fired, shock rendering her frozen in place. Ethan Mercer groaned from where he lay, blood staining his white dress shirt. The bullet had grazed his side, not fatal but painful. His breaths were shallow, his face twisted in agony. Sophia Dawson, still clutching her injured shoulder, sat against the wall, her tear-streaked face pale. Her breaths were ragged, her entire body trembling. "Help me," she whimpered to the officers who rushed in. "Please." The officers wasted no time. EMTs were already tending to Ethan and Sophia while two uniformed cops secured the scene. But it was Julia who drew the most attention. She was the one covered in blood. She was the one sitting closest to the gun. And she was the one who couldn't seem to say a single word. Detective Langley crouched down in front of her, his tone even but firm. "Mrs. Mercer, I need you to tell me what happened here." Julia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry, her mind a chaotic storm of emotions. What had happened? She had walked into her worst nightmare. She had confronted them. Her voice cracked. "I don't know." Langley's gaze flickered to the gun. "Did you fire the weapon?" Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "No." But then she hesitated. Had she? Sophia sobbed from across the room. "She did. She was going to kill me." Julia's head snapped toward her sister, rage flashing in her eyes. "You lying?" Ethan groaned, trying to sit up, his voice weak. It was an accident." Langley frowned. The stories weren't lining up. He turned to the officers. "Separate them. I want statements taken individually." As the officers escorted Julia, Sophia, and Ethan into different rooms, Langley ran a hand through his graying hair. Something was missing here. This wasn't just a crime of passion. There was something deeper. Then one of the officers called out, "Detective, you're going to want to see this." Langley turned, his gut already telling him this case was about to get even more twisted. The officer held up a phone. Ethan's phone. The screen was still unlocked, displaying a string of messages. Langley's eyes narrowed as he read the words. "We have to be careful. She can't find out. I love you, I don't care what happens to her. Soon we'll have everything." His jaw tightened. Months of deception. Secret rendezvous. Carefully planned lies. And then the last message. "Tonight it all ends." Langley exhaled slowly, piecing it together. This wasn't just an affair. This was something far more sinister. And someone in this house was lying. The twisted truth. Detective Marcus Langley sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the cold metal table. The weight of the case was pressing down on him, but something about it gnawed at the edges of his instincts. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong. This was deeper. More calculated. He glanced down at the evidence in front of him. Ethan's phone, smeared with blood, its last messages painting a far more sinister picture. Across the table, Sophia Dawson sat with a blank stare, her injured shoulder hastily bandaged. She had stopped crying, her tear-streaked face now set in an expression of cold resolve. Langley studied her for a moment before finally breaking the silence. "How long?" Sophia blinked. What? The affair, he clarified. How long had it been going on? She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. Does it even matter now? Langley leaned forward. It matters more than you think. Sophia's gaze dropped to the table. Almost a year, she admitted. It started as a mistake. A stupid, drunken mistake. But then, it became something else. Langley raised an eyebrow. Something else. Her voice lowered. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Something about the way she said it made Langley pause. He tilted his head. Then how was it supposed to end? Sophia exhaled sharply, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. You wouldn't understand. Langley folded his arms. Try me. She hesitated, her fingers tightening into fists. Ethan, he told me he loved me. That he was going to leave her. That we just had to be patient. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed on. He said she'd never let him go. That she'd ruin him if she found out. And then, she trailed off, her eyes flickering toward the door. Langley's expression darkened. And then what? She swallowed. He said there was another way. A cold chill settled over the room. Langley remained still, waiting. Sophia let out a shaky breath. He said accidents happen all the time. That sometimes, things just go wrong. Langley clenched his jaw. Are you telling me this wasn't just an affair? That Ethan was planning something? Sophia's lip trembled, and for the first time since the shooting, real fear flashed in her eyes. I didn't want to believe it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I think he was planning to get rid of her. Langley sat back, his mind racing. If what Sophia was saying was true, then this was never about love. This was about something far more dangerous. Control. He picked up the phone again, scrolling through the messages. Tonight it all ends. Ethan hadn't meant the affair. He had meant Julia. Langley's stomach twisted. The real betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the intent. And now, someone had nearly paid for it with their life. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, reporters clutched their notepads, and Julia Mercer sat at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The past few months had been a relentless storm. Interrogations, media frenzy, and now the trial that would determine her fate. Across the room, Sophia Dawson sat stiffly, her face pale. She had been called as a key witness, her testimony shaping the very core of the case. And then there was Ethan Mercer, now a shadow of the man he once was. Bandaged, pale, and visibly weakened, he had somehow survived the gunshot. But survival did not mean freedom. The prosecution painted a grim picture, an enraged wife who had walked in on betrayal and snapped. A crime of passion, they called it. Julia, humiliated and furious, had grabbed the gun in a fit of rage. She had wanted blood. The defense, however, argued a different reality. Julia Mercer was not just a scorned wife. She was a victim of manipulation, deception, and near murder. Ethan had planned to rid himself of her, and Sophia, knowingly or unknowingly, had been complicit. But things hadn't gone according to plan. When Julia arrived home early, chaos erupted, and in the struggle, the gun had gone off. But who had pulled the trigger? Testimonies were conflicting. Ethan, in his fragile state, claimed he had been unarmed and that Julia had acted in a jealous rage. Sophia, on the other hand, wavered. She had admitted on the stand that Ethan had spoken about another way to handle Julia. But was that enough? Then the forensic report had arrived. The gunshot trajectory. The fingerprints. The bruises on Julia's arms as if someone had grabbed her forcefully. And most damning of all, the deleted messages found on Ethan's phone. Messages where he had hinted at getting rid of Julia. Messages that painted him not as the victim, but as the perpetrator of a plan that had gone horribly wrong. After weeks of deliberation, the jury returned. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. The judge cleared his throat. In the matter of Julia Mercer versus the state, on the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant. A heartbeat passed. Not guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Julia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears welled in her eyes as relief flooded her body. But it wasn't over. Ethan wasn't just a man who had an affair. He was a man who had plotted against his own wife. The prosecution had swiftly shifted focus, filing charges against him, conspiracy to commit a violent crime, attempted coercion, endangerment. He wouldn't walk away unscathed. Sophia, for her part, was left to pick up the broken pieces of her own life. Her relationship with Julia was in ruins. How could it not be? She had been blinded by love, by desire, by whatever Ethan had promised her. And in the end, she had almost been collateral damage in a plan she hadn't fully understood. As Julia walked out of the courthouse that day, the flashes of cameras and the roar of reporters surrounded her. The world wanted to know, how did she feel? What was next? She didn't answer. She simply walked forward, leaving behind the shattered illusion of a perfect marriage, a perfect family. Because now she knew the truth. And the truth had almost cost her everything. Betrayal is a slow poison, creeping through the cracks of trust until everything shatters. In one night, the lives of Julia Mercer, Ethan Mercer, and Sophia Dawson were forever changed. What started as a hidden affair spiraled into a moment of chaos, a single gunshot, and a courtroom battle that left the world questioning, who was truly to blame? Was it Ethan, the man who orchestrated a web of lies and deception, ultimately leading to his own downfall? Was it Sophia, whose choices blurred the lines between love and destruction? Or was it Julia, a woman pushed to the edge by the ultimate betrayal? This case reminds us how quickly love can turn into obsession, trust into manipulation, and loyalty into a dangerous game. But now we want to hear from you. Who do you believe was truly at fault? Was justice served in the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's discuss. If you found this case as gripping as we did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you real-life crime stories that will leave you questioning everything. Because sometimes the truth is far more shocking than fiction.